From the fields to the stars. The black struggle that reached NASA. Imagine this: you're a young black child in America. You're told you don't belong in certain schools. You're denied entry to libraries. You're forced to use separate bathrooms, ride in the back of buses, and drink from water fountains marked colored. Now imagine that same child growing up to calculate the flight path that carried astronauts to the moon. Imagine that same child becoming the very heartbeat of NASA's greatest missions. This is not fiction. This is not fantasy. This is history. And it is the story of how a people who once worked the fields, chained by oppression, rose to touch the stars. The story of the black struggle that reached NASA from the fields. To understand how incredible this journey is, we must go back to the beginning, long before the rockets, long before NASA, long before America even dreamed of reaching the moon. There were fields of cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane, worked by enslaved Africans and their descendants. For centuries, black hands built the wealth of America, but were denied education, opportunity, and freedom. Families were torn apart. Dreams were crushed before they could begin. Even after slavery was abolished, a new system of oppression took its place: sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, and segregation. Black children were sent to underfunded schools. Many were told they would never be more than maids, cooks, or janitors. Yet, in the quiet corners of these oppressed communities, seeds of greatness were being planted. Parents who had never learned to read pushed their children to study. Teachers in one-room schoolhouses inspired their students to dream beyond the fields. It is here, in this soil of struggle, that the roots of NASA's hidden figures were born. In the early 20th century, education became the weapon of resistance. Black colleges, known as HBCUs, became sanctuaries of hope. Institutions like Howard University, Tuskegee, and Hampton Institute trained generations of black scientists, mathematicians, and engineers at a time when most white universities shut their doors to them. But education alone wasn't enough. The outside world was hostile, opportunities were few, and yet some refused to accept limits. One young girl in West Virginia, Katherine Johnson, loved numbers so much that she skipped grades and entered high school at just 10 years old. But every step of her journey was met with resistance. When she tried to pursue higher education, segregation stood in her way. Still, she persisted. Another brilliant mind, Dorothy Vaughan, taught herself programming languages at a time when computers were brand new. She knew that if she didn't adapt, she and the other black women at NASA would be left behind. And Mary Jackson, an engineer trapped by segregation, fought to take night classes at a white high school so she could qualify for NASA's engineering program. She went to court, she won, and she became NASA's first black female engineer. These women were more than mathematicians. They were warriors. Every equation they solved was a battle. Every problem they cracked was a victory. In a world that tried to keep them invisible, they wrote themselves into history, entering NASA. In the 1940s and 1950s, as America entered the space race against the Soviet Union, NASA, then called NACA, was desperate for talent. They needed mathematicians. They needed engineers. They needed anyone who could calculate the impossible. And so, quietly, without much fanfare, black women were recruited. They were called computers, human computers. But let's be clear, this wasn't equality. These women worked in separate offices. They used separate bathrooms. They ate in separate cafeterias. Segregation followed them even into the heart of America's most advanced scientific institution. Yet inside those walls, they proved what no racist system could deny: their brilliance. Katherine Johnson calculated trajectories for the Mercury missions. John Glenn, the first American to orbit Earth, trusted her numbers over the machines. He famously said, "Get the girl to check the numbers. If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go. Dorothy Vaughan mastered the IBM computers that would soon replace human calculators, making sure black women stayed at the forefront of technology. And Mae Jemison, the engineer who fought for her seat in the classroom, used her position to advocate for women and minorities, breaking barriers for those who came after her. These were not just workers, they were pioneers. They were proof that talent knows no color. The 1960s. The world was changing. The civil rights movement was shaking America to its core. Marches, protests, sit-ins, and speeches filled the streets. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of a dream where children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. At the very same time, inside NASA, rockets were being prepared to pierce the sky. America was desperate to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. But here's the truth. Without black brilliance, America might never have made it. Katherine Johnson's equations determined the flight path for Apollo 11, the mission that carried Neil Armstrong to the moon. Think about that. The same America where black people were fighting just to vote relied on a black woman's calculations to make history. And yet, even as their work reached the stars, many of these pioneers still returned home to segregated neighborhoods, still faced discrimination, still had to fight to be respected. The irony was painful. They could send rockets to the moon, but they couldn't eat at the same lunch counters as their white co-workers. The Apollo missions are remembered as mankind's greatest achievement. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But behind that moment on the moon were voices that history nearly forgot. There were the mathematicians, engineers and technicians, black men and women who weren't on TV screens, but whose fingerprints were all over the mission. People like Charles Bolden, who would later become an astronaut and even administrator of NASA. People like Ed Dwight, who trained as the first black astronaut candidate, were denied the opportunity to fly due to racism. And let's not forget the countless janitors, secretaries, and support staff, black workers who kept NASA running even while being overlooked. They didn't make speeches. They didn't plant flags. But without their work, Apollo could not have succeeded. This was the dual reality of black excellence in America, critical to success, yet denied recognition. In 1983, the dream leapt from the ground to the sky, when Dr. Guion Bluford became the first African American in space. For the first time, a black man looked down at Earth from orbit. He wasn't just an astronaut. He was a symbol, proof that the barriers could be broken. A few years later, Dr. Mae Jemison would follow, becoming the first black woman in space. She carried with her not just the weight of science, but the weight of generations who had been told it was impossible. And the story didn't end there. Jeanette Epps was selected to join future missions. Victor Glover flew to the International Space Station in 2020, spending 6 months in orbit as part of SpaceX's Crew 1 mission. Each of them stood on the shoulders of those who came before: Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, Mae Jemison, and countless others whose names we may never know. Each of them was proof that no matter how deep the struggle, the stars are never out of reach. From the fields to the stars, from oppression to orbit, from struggle to triumph. This is not just a story about NASA. This is not just a story about space. This is the story of a people who refuse to be defined by limits. Every equation written, every launch calculated, every star reached. It all carries the fingerprints of those who once were told they had no place in science. So the next time you look at the night sky, remember, there are stars out there, lit by black brilliance. And maybe, just maybe, the next great explorer who will set foot on Mars will be watching this video right now. The struggle is not over. The journey continues, and the stars are waiting. Tell this story. Share this story. Because the world must know, our journey did not stop in the fields. It reached NASA, and it will keep reaching, higher and higher, until the stars themselves are not out of reach. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, because together, we don't just tell history, we make it.